Welcome back to Empathetic Presence, a podcast to liberate our voices. I'm your host, Lee Bonvisuto, and today I am so excited to share my interview with Chana Ginelle Ewing. Chana is a storyteller, cultural entrepreneur, founder, and chief creator at littlebigworld, where queer imagination and care-centered politics inform strategic marketing to move our world forward. Happy Pride. As queer lives are continually under attack, it has never been more important for us to share our stories and use our voices. I hope you enjoy my interview with Chana Ginelle Ewing here. Welcome, Chana.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being on. And Chana, I want to ask you a question that I start each interview with, which is, how do you use your voice right now?
Mm, how do I use my voice right now? So I knew this question was coming, and I had a prepared answer. But then when you said it just now, it made me pause to think about I don't think it's because of the right now piece.
I know.
Like I think how we use our voice in this moment just changes like on a day to day basis. Um,
Right?
but I would say, broadly speaking, I'm really interested in helping people understand their identities as power. So essentially, any deviation from dominant identities, which is like, cis, white, male, Christian, um, heterosexual, right? Like that's kind of like the most dominant identity that we have. And then there's all the deviations from that, is typically seen as like a limitation in the society, right? Though obviously different communities have reclaimed their identities over time, over decades. Um, but my goal in the work that I do and the voice that I have is to have people understand their unique identities and cultural backgrounds as a source of pride and power, and as a source of unique genius that they can apply to all the work that they do. So, not that it stops um, in the space of our social interactions, but you can extend that to everywhere. I think there was a former professional culture that sort of looked at um, your identity and culture as like, oh, leave that at home, right? And
Yeah.
the work that I do is around, or how I use my voice is around, no one is ever leaving any of that at home.
Yeah.
We've all adopted, a professional stance, which is largely um, a white supremacist capitalist
Yep.
stance, honestly.
Yep.
And we've all kind of, unbeknownst to ourselves, like that's sort of what professional identity looks like. And so we leave our culture and, our genders, um, our race, our ethnicities, all of that at the door, so that we can become this flattened group of people in order to engage in society. And so I
Yep.
think largely my voice and the work that I do is around acknowledging that flatness doesn't exist for anyone. Um,
Yep.
and that for folks who have been, multiply marginalized, it's extremely hard to fit into that, flat mold, nearly impossible. And we shouldn't ask people to do that. And in fact, we should acknowledge that how they are showing up is powerful and that they have unique genius. And so I think that's essentially how I think of using my voice.
Yeah, Chana. Oh, I love so much of what you just shared. And, that dominance, that's really the point, right? That it's dominating people and it's controlling people and it's by design. In my work, I talk a lot about a dominant default. And here in this moment, it's it's just being pushed on people and people are being suppressed. And so I so love, this is why I wanted to have you on, because what you're talking about, identities as power and unique genius, and this is the work that you do. And one of the first moments where I met you was around you publishing this incredible book and the ABC of Equality, which is threadbare because my child, has just read it so much, it's falling apart.
I love to
But
hear
you
that.
do so, of course, we love this book,
Mhm.
and you have done so many things as an author, as an entrepreneur. You ran Genie, a beauty business. You've done so much, and right now you're running Little Big World. And just to quote a little bit of the messaging magic, where queerness recognizes our collective right to freedom and advances towards that vision through care, connection, justice, and equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. I could continue with your
Mm.
messaging because it's moving me so much, but tell me about this venture, why you started it, why it matters.
Thank you so much. And honestly, it's so cool to hear someone else read, like say the messaging out loud. So part of, as a new business, one of the things that I do is I'll open up my philosophy and just have it on my one of my tabs every like
Yeah.
every day because as you know,
Wow.
being an entrepreneur, being a small business is hard and there's a lot of things that go in our day. And so just like I feel like I'm the number one audience for that philosophy. Like it just reminds me, it guides me back to why I'm doing this. Like so when I'm creating a social media post that I don't want to do, like or when I'm
Yeah.
like, stuck in QuickBooks or I'm doing some little tedious spreadsheet task, just to kind of have that vision recenter me and like keep me mindful of the
Oh,
ones that
yeah.
yeah. So essentially, my career has looked like um, the intersection of like creativity, storytelling, and identity, right? Like I think, my very first business was actually called Little Big Girl. And so it's just fitting that this is actually a callback to my very first business back in 2009. And the business then was Little Big Girl, and it was like a riff on uh what is Seth Godin, like Seth Godin's book where his head is coming up from the bottom of the book. I
Yeah.
don't know, the bald head. So I had an illustration. My logo was a little girl, a little black girl with an afro coming up from the bottom of the image in a circle. And the concept there was just like this um this tension between commanding presence and playfulness, being very sure and of your self expression, being very sure of your story, but also um, having a willingness to experiment and willingness to um, express beyond your imagination. And so
Yeah.
I think like that first business, and that first business really I was about working with small businesses around their strategic story. That was essentially what we did. We were like helping people use the hero's journey as a way of looking at their journey on social media and like how they connect with audiences. That was my very first business. And then as I moved into that business, a lot of my clients ended up being films and documentaries and filmmakers. And so moving, a lot of cross and turns here. I also had a business that was, like you mentioned, Genie, that was a beauty business around identity, using your self expression to like promote small businesses that you care about and also
Mm.
buying from small brands that you care about, right? So I think they're all of these businesses and threads kind of come back to this concept of connecting stories to identity and to creativity. So when I closed Genie back in, I think I closed Genie, I think it was the middle of 2023. So when I closed Genie in the
Yeah.
middle of 2023, I thought a lot about like, where do I want to go from here, right? Because I had veered off into this startup path And the startup path, though it was fun and it was, I guess it was values aligned in some way, it really, it took me into some places that I didn't necessarily feel like was authentic, fully authentic to me. And so I said in my new business, what I wanted to do was like center my own creativity. So part of what I've done for the last few years has been marketing others, right? Like marketing brands, marketing businesses, marketing nonprofits. So in 2023, when I let go of the business, what I started to do was go back to one of my first passions, writing. So I freelanced for about a year and I started writing. I launched a Substack, I think middle of last year. And after I started moving my voice forward, like my authentic writing and voice, I was like, okay, now this business is gonna be built from Chana, right? Like it's going to be a full reflection and home for my own creative endeavors and also for the support of other like-minded brands and organizations. So I think I did that pretty intentionally because I think a lot of times we think about um, our creative output or our passions as like these side hustles that have to exist separately from your business. And I'm I'm a writer at the end of the day. So the way I see the world is through a writer's lens. That's what I'm applying to marketing. And so I'm like, this business needs to intentionally leverage Chana, the writer, if it's going to succeed. So that I have a platform for myself to showcase my own thinking, but also to connect that very intentionally to the clients and um, partners that I work with.
And even you talking about your creative storytelling identity, these three words being the foundation of everything you've ever done, from Little Big Girl to Little Big World, from the books that you've written through the businesses that you've started to the films that you support, those three words, it's not a varying journey at all. It makes so much sense, right?
Mm, mm.
And I love that you keeping yourself and your story at the center, because that creates space for everyone to bring more of their selves to the center of their own stories.
100%. And that's what keeps me honest, right? So like if I were to try to perform, at the end of the day, when you're obviously it's, you coach folks, right? So obviously it's a little bit different when you're coaching someone who is working within an organization, right? And how they think about their relationship to their job and their career, right? And how they are in partnership with the brands that they work with, not necessarily centered, it's somebody else's vision that they're working with, right? But in the case of an entrepreneur and a business that you're building, it doesn't necessarily, what I think I had to learn is that, because all of like Jeannie was like this. I did another business called Michelle Obama. There was a couple of businesses before this where even Little Big Girl to a certain extent, even though I have the logo that looked like me, I still was doing this sort of like professional identity versus like personal identity. And I was keeping myself separate, right? And I was like, I don't want the business to be about me. The business isn't about me. Like, I want people to like hire Little Big Girl. I want people to like buy from Jeannie. I want people to like come to Michelle O'Brunch or whatever it is, not because of me. And it's like the reality is when you're a business owner, it is you, right? Like it's very much you, It's like um and it's, especially if you're in any sort of if your business requires any sort of creativity, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense for me to like try to present something that is divorced from me or that is apart from me. I want it to be fully aligned and people be like, oh yes, this person in this business makes sense for me to work with and for them to support my brand journey. So
Absolutely. Yep. And I love that for entrepreneurs, and it's absolutely what we need. But I also see this, so many of my clients are within the corporate world, and many of them, some of them fall into that dominant default, but many more of them fall into the categories that we're talking about in intersectionality and what you said about multiple marginalization, right? And for even people in the corporate world, helping them bring more of their identity, because there is this restriction, this exclusion, the weaponization of this word professional, and who's seen as professional and who gets to decide that. And so I think what you're doing is important for entrepreneurs, but I think you helping us, own our full identity, our creativity, our story is so important. I've always been really bored by traditional marketing and demographic targeting, all these, when I was in theater and having PR people say, oh no, it has to fit in this box, but who is that supporting and who is that uplifting? And so, can you tell me a little bit more about your approach in Little Big World, and how you are, in your words, who gets left behind, whose stories deserve telling, who's benefiting from these stories being told? How do you think about that in terms of marketing?
100%. So the reason why, we're specifically talking about queer thinking changes everything is because for me, queerness is beyond desire, right? It's an approach to life, right? And it's how we think about our relationships writ large. So, it's going beyond traditional understandings of like gender, of family, of self-expression, who we relate to, how we relate to them, who we center, and really stepping into mutuality, trust, care, built around these expanded understandings of our connections, right? So it's not just looking at like, okay, it's not accepting traditional default modes of being, right? Like it's the ability to be able to think about this is a binary. Can I go beyond that binary? Like this, okay, so folks say you express yourself this way. Can I express myself that way? Right? Like it's having the ability to like see for yourself who you want to be in the world, and also to build connections that are not based off of assigned roles that are default given to you. Like this is my mother, this is my father, this is my husband, this is my girlfriend, and so therefore it means this, right? Like this queerness is beyond any of those kind of understandings, right? So it's a politic in many ways, and so I really like that framing. And unbeknownst to me, it's like honestly how I was approaching marketing and creativity and storytelling anyway, right? Like and it became more clear to me that that was my lens in writing an ABC of equality, right? And like
Yeah.
the work around that children's book, it was like really, it really clarified to me, oh, like the way I'm seeing the world is very expansive, and I'm and purposefully and intentionally trying to push myself out, wherever I'm doing um, either or thinking. Like I'm intentionally trying to live in a world that thinks in terms of like and right. And so I think like that's in terms of how we look at marketing. We don't, when someone says, okay, um, we want to. I always like to use this example. I want to create a film that targets um, NYC bikers, right? So like that's like or even NYC black bikers, right? Like that might be the like my documentary targets NYC black bikers. Okay. So what we would think about is like, okay, who is that? Right? Like in whose story would likely if you said NYC black bikers, who you probably would likely think of is thin, uh, able-bodied,
Yeah.
probably masculine folks, right? Like that's who you would think about. Maybe young, right? Like these are images that might come to mind. But we might think about, okay, what about the older bikers? What about the disabled bikers? What about the black bikers? What about the trans bikers? Like, what? It just enables us to think about, like, go past those like prejudgments around who likes to bike and who can bike, and dig into all the other rich communities that might be in New York that might like biking, right? So that is like built into how we are thinking about who we're serving and who's left out of a picture of a story or the picture of a target demographic.
Oh, I love that. I love it so much. And it gives us even a roadmap to think about storytelling differently. And the fact that it's expansive instead of exclusive, that it is building more inclusion. And, this is what I love about being non-binary. And I really, as a non-binary person, I'm quite binary in my thinking. And I really believe that we all are just built in this binary, and it's ingrained in us, right? And even I'm a trans person, but I still fall back into that binary thinking. And it's a default for us. And it's one of the reasons why I love gender nonconformity, is because it forces us to be conscious and to be present and to acknowledge people for their full identities, right? And I love that you're bringing that into marketing because it's so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I can't help but think in this moment, about AI, and I'm sure that this is something you're thinking about so much too. And something, this technology, which, we know just traditional data teams and the ways that these products are being built are probably not representative and are not being created in the most equitable way. And so, how do we use this technology while keeping ourselves and our communities safe?
Oh, it's such a good question. And the thing is, what came to mind just now, I don't know, I think I read last week in terms of, I know you talked about AI specifically, but I think one of the things that AI is learning from and feeding from is the net, right? It's just feeding from general internet. And I read somewhere how Google now um is like sort of editing its answers, right? So like if you're unable to get the full knowledge of a story, right? Because of the agenda that is in the US around like revisionist history, right? Like, so, you know, we want to ignore the fact that people are in fact oppressed today and have been oppressed since, you know, this founding of this country, right? We want to ignore that story and create a whole new understanding of what the US is. It's like quote unquote patriotic, and patriotic means to uh, not interrogate or to push your quote unquote country to be better, or live into
Right.
its values. Patriotic means to you know unconsciously align to whatever it is that your government at the moment is saying is the truth of history. And so it's interesting how apparently these platforms are now aligning with these stories so that they don't get the ire of this government, so that they kind of get out of harm's way and so they can continue profiteering. So I think that is really interesting because, yeah, like what is online and what comes up in searches and what what's available for knowledge is the thing that powers these large language models, right? So if if the content is inaccurate or false, or tells a different story of history from the point of view of the conqueror, the point of view of the colonizer, and the point of view of the dominant folk,
Yep.
then that will be reflected in the AI that we use. And so I will always say it's really important for people to just not if you are using AI, first of all, learn as much as you can around AI and ethics and prompt engineering. I know that that's like, something that people talked about a little bit like around like more like in 2022 and 2023, first started learning about ChatGPT, it was like all about prompt engineering. And now people don't talk about it as much anymore because everyone's like, oh, that's the AI. You just pump it in, you put something in it, it'll like spit it out right for you. And it's like, no, actually, you have to be really thoughtful around what your inputs are. And you also need to push back if it's giving you inputs that like outputs that to be false or be suspicious, because a lot of times it's just reflecting the story of the times, you know. So yeah, it's it's a very complicated situation, I think, on many thought. We're not even talking about the environmental impacts, but like just from the point of view of like how you were using it, I think that it's not wise to just allow AI to just like be your new brain without you being the leader of that, and you kind of using some discernment around the information that it's gathering for you.
Right, because the technology is not unbiased. It's
Exactly.
created by, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And we're seeing the way that it's being weaponized against people, and it's creating, a really dangerous situation for erasure and discrimination and
Hmm.
doxing, all of it, right? Yeah. And what I really love about this conversation, Chana, I've known you for some time in so many different contexts, but I can really hear that your creative process, it's 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 stayed consistent, I'm sure, throughout all of these projects, and that it sounds like you have this new language and this new vehicle in Little Big World to share that gift with the world. But I love just how consistent your creative process sounds and how rooted it is in your identity, in your creativity, and in helping others build power in their identity. And I'm really
Mm.
obsessed with that idea right now. And I wonder, do you have more books in the future, or what's next?
Mm.
What are you working?
So I don't know. Yes, I would hope I would love to do a memoir at some point. I recently have been really exploring poetry, and that's been really fun to do. Um, I have a screenplay in the back of my mind, so there's a lot of different like modes of storytelling that I'd like to entertain in addition to a book. And I think I want to do a book on marketing. Honestly, that would be even fun to do a book on marketing from this lens. I'm pretty obsessed with marketing. I think it gets a bad name, mostly because one of the things I like to tell my clients all the time is like marketing shouldn't uh, tell a false story or make up for gaps in the product, right? Like the marketing should we should you should have a great product, and all we have to do is gather the folks around that product or that story, right? But so
Hmm.
often what happens is the opposite. Most people are using marketing to tell a story about a product that doesn't exist, right? Or to
Wow.
showcase values that are not real, right? Like people use they weaponize marketing essentially. This is what they do.
Yeah.
Like they are telling false stories, or they're trying to get people into their pipeline, or trying to convert consumers around identities and ideals that are not true, or product features that are not true, in order to like hopefully convince you to buy with them, or buy their product or buy their service, right? And what I would say is like, let's not use that's not the goal. That's not the goal of marketing, in my opinion. The goal is
Hmm.
to use these tools, right, to to bring an amazing story, an amazing product in front of an audience, right? And if you need to think, because I think sometimes like you can think about like what comes first, like the the strategy or the actual marketing, right? Sometimes you could bring a marketer's lens or communications professional's lens into your strategic product development, or early on in the life stage of a product, or early on in the life stage of a film, to kind of give you that lens
Mm.
around, okay, the end result and how that's going to resonate with an audience. So you can use, marketing from that lens, but often, like, don't don't so that you just get the feedback of like how to build this thing, right? That's fine. But often that's not what's happening. What's happening is you have a poor product or poor story, and you're putting a band-aid. You're trying to use marketing as a band-aid to cover up for that. And that's why
Yeah.
I think my profession gets a bad name, is because we come in and we have to make false claims around something that doesn't actually exist in real life, you know? And I think maybe some marketers are okay with doing that, right? I would rather work with a small business or brand around helping them achieve the goal of that product or service, right? So
Yeah.
bring me on early enough to help you with that strategic lens around who you're trying to serve, and building that product journey so that it
Yeah.
serves that audience in the way that you would like to serve it, versus on the end of that where it's like, this thing is just something not right here, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. For things to be built more holistically, right? And with the audience in mind. I love that, Shauna. And you talked about tools, that we have like vehicles and tools, but in the end, it's really just about great products and great things that we want to share, right? But like thinking about social media in this moment, I personally left most social media and feeling like a lot of the algorithms and the tech companies really censoring and shadow banning important conversations and stories and who's that most impacting. And I personally left that space. And I want to know from you, do you feel like we're going to move beyond the tools of social media? Will social media be in our rear view sometime soon because of all of the censorship and silencing that we're seeing? Or do you think that social media is here to stay? I'm just curious to know what you think about our tools.
Two things. The first is, all of these platforms have an agenda around consumption. So we know that in and of itself, right? Like they are all focused on consumption, because at the end of the day, even though it's free, they are trying to monetize your consumption, right? Like that's their goal in the story. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever the social media platform, they are trying to monetize your consumption. So if you look at it from that point of view, then there's only really two roles
Hmm.
for a business on social media, right? Is either as a creator, so you are willing to come on social media and create a lot of content so that it's consumed, right? So that you can then monetize those consumer eyeballs. You bring them on a journey from seeing you on an Instagram post to joining your newsletter to then taking an action from your newsletter. You use this brand, you use them as like top of funnel, and you bring people deeper into your funnel until they make a sale, right? So
Yeah.
you can be a creator and you do that to monetize, right? Or you can be an advertiser. Or you can be an advertiser, right? Like you can place ads, right? I would say that if you're not on social media doing either of those two things, then you are likely being a passive consumer that is being monetized, right? And we should all think about what that means for us, right? So if I'm saying that I don't want to be a creator or an advertiser, then I need to be really mindful about what my consumption looks like. Because if you just let that consumption run free, unchecked, then you start to experience, uh, mental health challenges. You start to feel bad. Like, there's all these like attendant issues that come from just passively consuming social media all day, right? Like if you were to passively sit and watch a TV show for 8 hours, right? Like it's, you might get some like, that dopamine hit of like joining that story, but are you really feeling good for like laying on your couch for 8 hours? It's not super beneficial for your health, to just be
Right.
on your couch for 8 hours watching content, right? Like that's not. So if you think about it from that point of view, I think it helps people understand um, why social media can be an important tool for marketers, for business owners, and how you can leverage it for those reasons, and why it may not make sense to just use it to consume. Like
Yeah.
I wouldn't 1010 will not recommend. Like
Not in this
I'm
moment. No.
personally only on these channels when I'm marketing. Like I barely like use. I have a goal of becoming more of a creator for my own marketing, right? But
Right.
not to sit there and just consume content all day.
Yeah. Yeah, this mindless, unconscious consumption, which I think has been going on for some time, but particularly over the last 5 years, right?
And it's intentional. So these apps are built that way for you to continue to swipe and continue. That's just how they're built. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And one of my biggest subsets of clients over the last 10 years has been data leaders and machine learners and data scientists and the people building this, and many of the people I've supported have been advocating for data governance and data ethics, at companies that are proving that they don't really care about that. So, and one last question for you, Chana. And I'm so just glad that we've had this conversation. I think what you're doing at Little Big World is essential in terms of creating new avenues for marketing, for us hearing more stories, for us having more agency over our narratives and the way that we are owning our identities. I'm just so grateful to you for your work, for who you are. And I want to know, how are you caring for yourself in this moment, which is really hard? It's hard to care for ourselves right now. And how are you making sure that you are?
Absolutely. A couple things. One is I'm really trying to think about rest. I am, unfortunately, I've dealt with insomnia for years and all, challenges around sleep. So for me, like working around my rest and my sleep, and one of the things that I say to myself is like, I take rest whenever it comes to me. So like, if I'm tired in the middle of the day, I would like try to go take a little power nap versus
Good.
like trying to wait to the end of the night, so really being very rest centered so that I can optimize myself and do my best work. That's really important. The other piece is that I'm an extrovert, so people, I just need to be around people. I
Nice.
love being with my community. I love being around my friends. I love finding the perfect co-working space to go and do work at, which I'm and like I'm in a cafe right now, so I'm always thinking about how I can put myself near people so that I can get the energy that I need in order to be productive in my work day. Those are the two things that I'm always looking at. And then for your other, I wanted to just say this last thought too, which is around the concept of your podcast, which is like executive presence. And I think like I was thinking about this a bit, and it goes back to something you literally just said, which is like executive identity, executive presence is really about just owning your identity, like being fully in your own sovereignty, like it's like being like, I am committed to my vision, I own who I am, and I can be that wherever I am.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, why I started this is because for 10 years I just keep hearing all of these people being criticized for being themselves and that executive presence is weaponized against people. And I agree with you that if we can, stand in our power and own our identity, that is where our, executive presence comes from. And yet like so many other things, these words are being weaponized and are being particularly used to silence particular people. And so I'm really grateful to you for all of your work and all of the work you do to uplift not just queer stories, but really all stories, and that's part of
Mhm.
event. And I'm grateful to know you. I'm grateful for the way that you run your businesses. And thank you so much for coming on, Chana.
Thank you so much for having me, Lee. This has been fun.